It happened on one of those evenings that felt almost too calm, too gentle for anything important to unfold. And yet, that's when life tends to shift, isn't it? I had no idea my older brother would step onto the balcony with me that night. I didn't expect anything beyond a throwaway comment about the cold or the street below. We weren't the kind of siblings who traded secrets or waded into feelings. We cared, but from a careful distance. But when he sat down beside me under that dim stretch of sky, stared into the dark, and finally started to talk, I felt something inside the air change. His voice stayed low, his words came slowly, and what he said next made me see him and myself in a completely different light. It's strange how a handful of sentences can melt years of assumptions and misunderstandings. Greetings, dear listeners. Before I begin telling this complicated story of my life, I ask you to support our channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and write in the comments which city you are listening from. This is very important for us. And now, enjoy listening. My name is Myra, and I was 26 when it happened. I'd moved back into my childhood home after living on my own for a few years. The city hadn't turned out the way I'd pictured it. Career stumbles, a breakup, and a kind of exhaustion I kept pretending was normal. So I returned to the quiet suburb I once couldn't wait to escape. Back to the house with its creaky floors, the hallway that still smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper, and back to the roof I shared with my brother, Evan. He was 3 years older. We weren't enemies, not even close, just on different wavelengths. Evan was quiet and observant, thoughtful, but hard to reach. He always seemed to know things, but he kept them inside like he lived one step away from everyone else. I was more expressive, quicker to talk, quicker to feel. Evan was the one who spoke only when it truly mattered. That evening, the house was unusually still. Mom had gone to visit Aunt Rosa for the weekend. Dad was traveling for work. It was just the two of us, rare silence in a place usually full of movement. The sun had dropped behind the trees, leaving long shadows stretched over the backyard. I stepped onto the small balcony overlooking our slightly wild garden. It was cool enough for a sweater, but not cold enough to drive you inside. I carried a mug of chamomile, hoping it might quiet my nerves, and curled into the old wicker chair that had been there since my teen years. The sky was painted in lavender and gray, the last of the light thinning out like smoke. I didn't expect anyone to join me. I was watching a moth tap against the porch light when I heard the balcony door creak behind me. Evan came out slowly, holding a mug of his own coffee, maybe, or tea. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, eyes scanning the horizon like he was searching for a word he couldn't find. Then he sat in the chair across from me. His posture looked casual, but his face didn't. His brow was slightly pinched, his mouth set as if he'd been thinking all day. We sat in silence for a full minute, listening to leaves shift and a bird chirp once before settling down for the peramish. "Night, you've been quiet lately," he said at last, voice soft. I gave a small smile. "I could say the same about you." He nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Yeah, I guess that's always been my thing." Then another pause, and he stared toward the darkest edge of the yard where the porch light didn't reach. Something in the way he looked, not at me, but through everything, made me set my mug down. "What's going on?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he took a slow breath, leaned forward, and rested his elbows on his knees. "You know," he said, "I used to think you were the brave one. That stopped me." "What do you mean?" I asked. He kept his eyes on the yard. "You always went after what you wanted, even when it scared you. Moving to the city, starting over, even coming back here, I know that wasn't easy." I didn't know what to say. I'd never imagined he watched me like that. His voice dropped lower. "I've been stuck for a long time, Myra, ears, and I didn't know how to say it. I didn't want anyone to see it." A breeze slid across the balcony. I pulled my sweater tighter, but it wasn't the cold that made my skin prickle. "I've been dealing with something," he said, and then he paused like the words tasted unfamiliar. I waited, not pushing, just letting him choose his pace. "It's not depression the way people talk about it," he finally said. "It's more like I wake up and everything feels dull. Like the color drained out. I go to work, I eat, I sleep, but I'm not really there. And it's been like that for years." My chest tightened. I had no idea. He finally looked at me, eyes steady, but shiny, like he was holding back more than tears. "I didn't know how to talk about it," he admitted. "Not with mom and dad, not even with you. But then you came back and I saw how tired you looked and how you still smiled. You still tried." I swallowed hard. "I've had my moments," I said, more honest than I meant to be, more than I want to count. "I know," he said, softly, and that's what made me realize maybe I'm not the only one. Maybe I don't have to keep this locked up. Silence settled between us, the kind that says more than words can. I reached out and touched his hand. It was small, simple, but it felt enormous. "I'm glad you told me," I said. "I really am." He nodded and looked away, but his shoulders loosened like a strap had been UMBUCKLED. We stayed out there for over an hour, talking not only about what he felt or what I'd been carrying, but about memories, regrets, the weird comfort of coming home, and how sometimes the person you assume knows you the least is the one who actually sees you the clearest. When stars began to push through the thin clouds, I realized something without even trying. We weren't only siblings in the old sense anymore. We were two adults reaching across years of unspoken things, finally meeting in the middle. That night was the beginning. I didn't know it then, but it was the first quiet step in a shift that would change both our lives and change how I looked at the people I thought I already understood. The next morning carried the same stillness as the night before, but it felt different, like an invisible weight had been cleared out of the air. I woke earlier than usual. Soft golden light slipped through my curtains and laid warm stripes across the floor. For the first time in months, I didn't feel that familiar dread tugging at my chest. Instead, I felt a quiet kind of anticipation I couldn't explain. I found Evan in the kitchen. He was leaning against the counter, a half-eaten apple in one hand, his phone in the other. When I walked in, he looked up and met my eyes with a familiarity that wasn't forced or polite. It was real. "Hey," he said with a small smile. "Morning." "Morning," I replied, tugging my sweater around me like armor. I poured coffee and leaned against the opposite counter, studying him. He looked tired, but different lighter, maybe. "Sleep okay?" I asked. He nodded. "Better than usual." "You?" "Yeah," I said. "Me too." We drank in silence for a few moments, and for once it didn't feel like distance. It felt like peace. I hadn't realized how badly I'd been craving that. Evan cleared his throat. "I was thinking, if you're up for it, we could go for a walk later. Down by the reservoir." I blinked, surprised in the best way. That water had been our childhood hiding place, dragonflies, skipped stones, sunburned afternoons. We hadn't gone there together in years. "I'd like that," I said. "Yeah, let's do it." The day moved gently after that. We both handled our routines, laundry, emails, small errands. But the idea of that walk stayed in my mind like a thread, pulling me towards something I couldn't quite name. By late afternoon, the sunlight softened again, stretching long shadows across the neighborhood. We put on jackets and headed out, the air crisp but not punishing, the kind that wakes you up just enough to feel present. The reservoir was about a 15-minute walk. We didn't talk much on the way. Instead, we noticed the quiet houses, kids chalking driveways, the distant whir of a lawnmower. It was a silence that felt alive. When we reached the water, it looked almost exactly the way I remembered wide, and still framed by tall reeds, with birds swooping low across the surface. We found a bench near the edge and sat down. For a while, we just watched ripples spread and fade. It's weird, Evan said finally, how everything looks the same, but we're completely different now. Yeah, I murmured. Sometimes I feel like I left pieces of myself here, and now that I'm back, I don't know what to do with them. He nodded slowly. I think I buried parts of myself here and hoped no one would notice. I turned toward him. He kept staring at the water, thoughtful. The sun caught the line of his jaw, and for the first time I noticed how grown he looked, not just older, but grounded, shaped by life in a way I hadn't seen. I used to think you had everything figured out, I said quietly. You always seemed calm, in control. Evan laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. That was the act. I figured if I looked put together on the outside, the inside wouldn't collapse. Did it? I asked. He hesitated. Not all at once, he said, just little by little, until I felt like I was playing a role I didn't recognize. A breeze moved across the reservoir and shimmered the water. I pulled my jacket closer. I get it, I said. I've done my share of acting, too. He looked at me, then really looked, and something in his gaze softened. What happened in the city? He asked. You never really said. It took me a second. I hadn't told many people. Partly because I didn't want to sound like I was whining, and partly because I hadn't fully understood it myself. I thought I knew what I wanted, I began. I chased this picture of success, the job, the apartment, the relationship, like I was checking boxes. But none of it felt like mine. It felt like I was living someone else's plan. Evan listened without interrupting, hands resting loosely in his lap. And then it started falling apart. I continued. The job wasn't what I thought. The guy I was with, he was more in love with himself than with me. The harder I tried to hold everything together, the more I unraveled. Eventually, I packed a bag and came home. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pebble, smooth and gray, rolling it between his fingers like it was familiar. I used to come here alone, he said quietly, even after you left, just to sit and try to feel something. I watched the pebble turn in his hand, the way his thumb traced its surface like it held answers. I didn't know, I whispered. Evan lifted his eyes. That's the thing, Myra. We don't really know what anyone's carrying until we ask, until we actually listen. The truth of it hit me hard because he was right. We'd lived in the same house, passed each other in hallways, shared meals and holidays, and still managed to miss each other. But now we weren't missing anymore. As the sky deepened toward dusk and the last light touched the tops of the trees, I felt something shift between us again, not dramatic, not loud, just unmistakable. We weren't alone in what we felt. And for the first time in a long time, we were learning to speak the same language. The week that followed fell into a quiet rhythm that felt new, but also strangely familiar. Something unspoken settled between me and Evan, not a burden more. Like a presence, a recognition. Like after growing up in the same house but in separate worlds, we'd finally started walking in the same one. He didn't retreat into silence the way he used to, and I didn't fill every pause with nervous chatter. We found a balance, making coffee together, trading small comments over meals, sharing glances that carried more meaning than words. We didn't suddenly become best friends. It was more honest than that. It was understanding. A few nights after the walk, I was curled on the living room couch with a book open in my lap that I wasn't really reading. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator hum and the faint chirp of crickets outside. Evan walked in with 2 mugs of tea. He handed me one without speaking, then sat at the other end of the couch. Chamomile again? I asked, smiling as I caught the scent. It seemed to help last time, he said, and I could hear a shrug in his voice. We sipped for a while, the silence no longer itchy. Then he said suddenly, "Do you remember that night in high school when I picked you up from that party?" I blinked. I hadn't thought about that night in years, the one where I lied to Mom, said I was sleeping at a friend's, and ended up stranded when my ride disappeared. Evan nodded. You called me at midnight, basically crying. I was 15, I said, laughing softly. And you didn't even yell. You just came, picked me up, and said, "Don't tell Mom. Just don't make it a habit." He smiled. Down at his mug. "You looked so small in the passenger seat," he said, "like you were trying to disappear inside your hoodie." I groaned. I was mortified. "I know," he said, then quieter, "but I was proud of you for calling." And that made me go still. He'd never said that before. "It felt like you trusted me," he added, and that meant something. I looked at him, and for a second, he looked like the brother I used to admire from a distance older than his age. Quietly solid, someone I leaned on without fully understanding why. "I did trust you," I said. "I still do." He nodded, like he was taking that sentence and placing it somewhere safe. After a pause, he asked, "Do you ever think we kind of missed each other? Like we lived in the same house, but never really with each other?" I exhaled slowly. "Yeah," I admitted. "I do." I thought about it. Maybe we both needed to grow up before we could actually see each other. Evan released a breath more, of a letting go than a sigh. "I always thought I had to be strong," he said. "Like if you saw me struggling, it would make your life heavier." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was true in a painful way. "I used to think if I cracked, you'd think I couldn't handle anything," I admitted. We sat there with the irony of it, two people trying to protect each other from the truth, when the truth was exactly what we needed. Evan leaned back, resting his head against the couch. "You know what the hardest part has been lately?" He asked. "What?" "Feeling like I don't have a purpose," he said. "Like I'm just running the same loop, existing, not living." His words echoed something I'd thought but never dared to say out loud. That creeping fear of life becoming a repetition you can't escape. "I know that feeling," I said gently. "It's terrifying, but I don't think it's permanent. I think it's more like fog. The road is still there, you just can't see it clearly right now." Evan turned to look at me. "And you?" he asked. "Do you feel like you found your road again?" I hesitated. "I think I'm still finding it," I said. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to know the whole road. Maybe it's enough that we're not walking it alone." He didn't answer, but his eyes did, like he needed to hear it. Like a part of him was starting to believe it. Later that night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I realized something. This wasn't only about reconnecting with my brother. It was also about recovering parts of myself I'd buried. Softness, honesty, a sense of belonging I thought I had to chase somewhere else. It was strange how coming home, something I once labeled as failure, had become a quiet kind of revival. Not all healing is loud. Sometimes it's tea on a couch, awkward honesty, shared memories returning like old friends. Sometimes the people you assume will never understand you end up being the ones who were quietly waiting for the moment they could say, "I see you." The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping gently against my window. It was the kind of rain that blurred the world outside, like everything was being rinsed clean. I stayed in bed longer than usual, just listening and breathing. I felt different, not magically fixed, but steadier. Hearing Evan admit he felt lost hadn't just opened a door between us. It had cracked something open in me too. For years, I'd thought of him as the one who never needed anything, steady while I wobbled, Now I saw him more fully. And maybe for the first time in a long time, I saw myself more clearly too. When I finally went to the kitchen, Evan was already there, standing by the window watching the rain. A half-eaten piece of toast sat on his plate. He looked over and smiled warm, easy. "Still like rainy days?" he asked. I smiled back. "Always." "They make everything slower, softer?" He nodded. "Yeah, me too." We ate breakfast in a calm silence while the rain made a soft soundtrack. I found myself studying him, the absent way he chewed, the way his eyes still seemed to search even in stillness. I wondered how long he'd been floating like that, waiting. Then he set his mug down and said carefully, "I've been thinking maybe I should talk to someone, like a therapist." I looked up, surprised, not because the idea was wrong, but because he was saying it out loud. "That's a good idea," I said gently. "It's not weakness, wanting help." "I know," he replied. I think I just needed someone to say that without turning it into a lecture. I nodded. "I get it." He looked at me like he wanted to memorize the moment. "Thanks for not pushing," he said. "For just being there." "You've done that for me too," I replied. Evan smiled, the kind that starts in my eyes. "Maybe we're better at this than we thought." Later that day, we took another walk. No destination this time, just two siblings moving in step, umbrellas in hand, weaving through wet streets we'd known since childhood. The rain softened to mist, and everything smelled like earth and leaves and a hint of spring trying to arrive early. When we passed the old park, I stopped and looked. Through the fence. The swings were slick, the sandbox turned to mud. "Remember when you dared me to jump off the top of the slide?" I asked, laughing. Evan grinned. "And you actually did it." "Landed flat on your back?" I covered my face. I couldn't breathe for a full minute. "I thought I killed you," he said, chuckling. I was ready to confess to Mom right then. We both laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and clean. It felt good. It felt like being young and safe. For a second. By the time we got back, the clouds had thinned, and sunlight broke through, turning the wet lawn into gold. I paused on the porch steps, looking up at the sky, feeling something like peace settle into my bones. That night I went back out to the balcony. The rain had cleared, but the wood was still damp, and the air held a soft chill. I brought a blanket and a mug of tea and sat down just as Evan stepped out behind me. "Thought I'd find you here," he said. I smiled. "It's my favorite place to think." He sat beside me again, just like the first night. We didn't talk for a while. Stars began to appear, slow and steady. The quiet felt safe. After a long pause, he said, "I think we needed this, both of us, a reset." "Yeah," I whispered. "We really did." Evan leaned back and exhaled. "I used to think life had to be loud to matter," he said. "Big changes, big decisions. But maybe it's these small moments that hold the real weight." "I think it's both," I said. "The big moments are chapters. The small ones are what make the story worth staying for." He glanced at me, eyes soft. "You've always been better with words." I nudged his shoulder gently. "You've always had more in you than you let people see. You just needed someone to remind you." We stayed out there until the stars multiplied and the night wrapped around us like a quiet coat. I didn't need a dramatic ending or some perfect resolution. What we had now, this honesty, this new beginning, felt like enough. When I finally stood to go inside, I looked at him and said, "Let's not lose this, okay?" "We won't," he promised. And this time, I believed him. Sometimes the biggest changes don't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes they arrive as whispers in the dark, a confession, a cup of tea, a shared silence that simply says, "I'm here, I see you." That's how things changed between me and my brother. Not in a way anyone else would notice, but in a way that lasted deep and permanent.